FAFSA Update, featuring Rachel Coughlin, Director, Application Systems Division, and Kellis Robbins, Program Specialist, Product Management Group.
Good morning. I'm Kellis Robbins, and today Rachel Coughlin and I will be presenting this session on FAFSA updates. During today's session, we'll be covering updates to the actual FAFSA form, the FAFSA Processing System updates, the 2025-26 ICER updates, FAFSA Partner Portal updates, and we'll conclude with some references for further reading if desired. Our first topic will be updates to the FAFSA form itself. When the 2024-25 FAFSA form was first released, we understood and heard from the community that there were definite areas of improvement we could work on. To identify and prioritize these potential improvements, we analyzed data from a variety of sources. First and foremost, our own user acceptance testing, where we test the FAFSA code before it goes live to the public. Over the last year, our teams have spent more than 6 months testing and retesting the FAFSA. That's not to say the code was flawless when it was released. We know it wasn't. But by the time the form was public, we already had a decent idea about what needed to be fixed. We also did more than a dozen user experience studies, talking with more than 200 real users from a variety of age, income, and demographic backgrounds, resulting in more than 150 hours of interviews. In addition, we used production data from the site, tracking applications, rejections, where folks left the form, etc. We also implemented a new feedback survey where users would have the opportunity to tell us what went well or what didn't after they completed their section of the FAFSA. And finally, we listened to you, the community, gathering information from folks on the ground about what was happening. Out of all these sources, we identified 5 main areas to focus our improvement efforts on. To encourage users to provide their consent and approval to retrieve financial information on the FAFSA form, to acknowledge the retrieval of financial data from the IRS immediately following a user providing their consent, to encourage dependent students to correctly answer the direct unsubsidized loan-only question, to better facilitate the contributor invitation process, and to improve the signature process for all users. As most of you know, providing consent and approval is essential to determining the student's federal financial aid eligibility. And we really wanted to drive this home to the users who might initially be scared off by the legalese. If a user declines consent on the main consent page, we display the modal in the top right to nudge them to change their minds. If they still don't agree there, we present a second warning before they enter the finances section, since this is the part of the form where allowing us to request FTI could save them the most time. And if they still don't agree here, we catch them on the signature page, warning them about signing and or submitting without consent, and as well on their status center details page, which you'll see in the bottom right corner. We're not subtle. Related to consent, we heard from users who were providing consent and approval that they really weren't sure if it worked, since retrieving FTI happens behind the scenes. Some users were able to get through the form so quickly because their FTI could be used that they thought they'd missed something, that something was wrong with the FAFSA because it was too easy. A few even left feedback that they missed the old DRT system because it gave them peace of mind that something was happening. So we implemented these new IRS transfer screens that appear right after someone provides consent. This lets them know that we're doing something with their consent and helps mentally prepare them for what they should expect when they get to the finances section. Moving on to the direct unsubsidized loan-only question, we were surprised to find this year that although the question isn't new to the FAFSA, a lot of students were incorrectly answering it, leading to more frustration and corrections that could have been avoided. To address this, we started by updating the question language and helper text in a couple iterations. Once a change was made, we monitored rates of this reject, and when we realized our first rewording didn't have the impact we'd hoped for, we tried again and decided to take additional action as well. We defaulted the answer to this question to no, so that students would have to actively click yes in order to change it. And if they did select yes, we popped a modal, asking if they were sure this is what they wanted to do and if they wanted to go back and change it to no. We also sent multiple email campaigns to those who had selected yes to walk them through how to correct their answer if they needed to. Finally, we introduced specific directions on their My Activity Details page, making it easy to update their answer. Here you can see the defaulted answer to no and the warning modal if they changed it to yes. This means that students who do keep their answer to yes have to take direct action twice in the question and in the modal to make clear this is what they really want to do. We've also heard a lot about the contributor invitation process, and we focused a lot of energy on trying to improve it through better language on the page and behind the scenes improvements, especially for students and contributors without Social Security numbers. And we have several more improvements in the pipeline. For example, minimizing the parent, spouse, or partner invitation if the parents are married to make it clear to the student that they only need to invite one parent. And then depending on how that parent answers their section, the parent can invite their spouse or partner if needed. We're also looking into technical solutions to make the matching process of invitations to studentaid.gov accounts easier while maintaining site security. And finally, we plan on increasing visibility on pending invitations so it's more intuitive for contributors. The last improvement area I want to talk about today is the signature process. This screenshot of the review answers page includes new language at the top to tell folks that this isn't quite the end of their FAFSA section, and they need to click continue in order to get to the signature page. We also removed the gray signature box that appeared below the colleges section, as we heard this was confusing and folks expected to provide signature there instead of on the next page. Lastly, we updated the modal language that appears when a user tries to submit the FAFSA while still missing someone's consent or signature to make the aid eligibility consequences more clear and encourage them to reconsider submitting until all that information is provided. Now I'm going to pass it to my colleague Rachel Coughlin to talk through the backend FAFSA updates.
Thanks, Kellis. So I want to pick up and start talking about some of the FAFSA process system updates, or what the big story is that there's not really a lot of updates. The good news with the 25-26 FAFSA is that there wasn't any data element changes or any field changes to the form. Since there was no changes to the field questions, that really limited the amount of changes that we had to do to the FAFSA processing system. So most of our changes for 25-26 are what we call our rollover changes. Edits have been updated to account for the new award cycle. Age parameters have been increased. Date ranges have been increased to account for the new 25-26 cycle. In addition, the Student Aid Index, our SAI, has been updated for annual changes to the table values and to the offsets. And those have already been published. And then as a reminder, the 25-26 FAFSA will be using the tax year 2023 for the federal tax information. 24-25 use the 2022 tax year. Volume 5 of the FAFSA specification guide contains all the parameters and edits that the FAFSA processing system does. Those have been updated to account for the rollover changes. And then a slight change that we have made is that the parameter edits in the beginning of the FAFSA specification guide, we've now organized them alphabetically. In 24-25, they were in the order that they showed up in the edit. So based on feedback, putting them in an alphabetical order made them easier for readers to find the parameter value that they were looking for. So for 25-26, we are currently processing a couple of different sources of applications. So for the online FAFSA, we are allowing students and their contributors to submit initial applications, and they can make corrections. We are also processing 25-26 paper FAFSA applications. Those are both in English and Spanish. And in FAFSA Partner Portal, our financial aid administrators have been able to be making corrections to 25-26 applications. So those are all the items that are currently available. We will also be bringing in some additional functionality later on in the cycle. So the first one will be paper corrections to the 25-26 application. So this is where students or the contributors can make changes to a printed FAFSA submission summary. So we will be accepting those changes. And then also what we will be implementing later on in this year will be what we call our electronic data exchange corrections, EDE corrections. Some people call them batch corrections. So this is where schools or third-party software products can send us in files of corrections that they want to have applied to FAFSA applications. When this functionality is implemented, it will be implemented for both the 24-25 and the 25-26 cycle. So we will go back and allow schools and vendors to also send them in for the prior cycle. So talking about 25-26, I wanted to go back and cover a little bit around 24-25. I wanted to share some information around our matching with the IRS. So as a reminder, prior to the FAFSA processing system, students and parents or student spouses had the option to use the IRS data retrieval tool and go to the IRS and bring their information into the application. With the start of 24-25, that no longer became an option. The student, parent, or student spouse had to give us their consent, and we are automatically going over to the IRS to retrieve data. The good news is our matching with the IRS is extremely high. So we have about almost 68% when we go over to the IRS, we get tax data returned. So that means the IRS actually sends us back the AGI, taxes paid, information like that. We have a little over 31%. The IRS gives us the confirmation that this student, parent, student spouse is actually a non-filer. And then we have about 1.5% where the IRS is not able to send us information. And those are the populations that we have to send down the self-reported path, where since we weren't able to get the information from the IRS, they have to give us the data either online or on the paper application. In addition to the matching for the folks that we do get data back from the IRS, here's a breakdown of the tax filing status. So you can see the vast majority of our folks are coming back as single filers. Then for our married filers, we have a good percentage coming back as married filing jointly. We have a small percentage coming back as married filing a separate return. Head of household, that's a good percentage that's coming back as head of household. And then we have a very small population coming back as a qualifying surviving spouse. So we are just very pleased to see the amount of data and the matching that we are having with the IRS for the student and all of our contributors. So when we actually are going through and we are finding problems, and as we are getting them resolved, we will do what we are calling reprocessing. And that is a concept that we also did under the old system, which is where when we fix the issue in our system, we will correct the record. So we will create a new transaction to send it back through the system. So whatever the issue was on the record, it's corrected. So either the record will no longer be rejected, or it may have an SAI that's calculated correctly based on changes that we have made in the system. So one of the things we're going to do is for the reprocessing efforts, if we have to do the same reprocessing in both cycles in 24-25 and 25-26, we're going to use the same numeric code. So for example, reprocessing 04 is one that we have done a couple of times in the 24-25 cycle for the records that have a blank SAI but no reject. We are also doing that in the 25-26 cycle, and you will see the same reprocessing code. So we're going to keep the codes the same across the cycles if it's the same issue that is being corrected. In addition, one of the reprocessing efforts that we will do, we don't have a time for it yet, but currently for the Pell SAI in the 25-26, the maximum Pell SAI that we are using in our calculations is 7,395. The minimum Pell SAI is 740. We started the 25-26 cycle using those numbers. Once we are informed of the new numbers, we will go through and we will have to do a reprocessing to determine students' new Pell Grant eligibility, because there are students who are not currently eligible that may be eligible if the cutoff is increased. Once we do that reprocessing, we will use the reprocessing code of 01, and that's just what we used to do in the old system when we got the new Pell Grant tables. So 01 has always been saved for when we reprocess to determine if students now have Pell Grant eligibility based on the new information. So moving from the FAFSA processing system updates, I want to talk a little bit about ICERs. So in general, the story around our ICERs are the same around the FAFSA processing system, is that since there wasn't any question changes, there's been basically almost no changes to the ICER record layout itself. The first thing is the message classes. So there are no new message classes for the 25-26 cycle. The only thing is we'll use all the same message classes, but the middle two digits have been increased from 25 to 26. So the 26 indicates these are the files for the 25-26 cycle. The one new message class that we have here is around the ICER request, and I'll cover that a little bit when we get to the FAFSA Partner Portal section. So for the ICER record layout itself, there have been no changes to any of the current positions on the ICER record layout. So no new fields have been added. No fields have increased or decreased in size. So there's no changes in regards to positioning on the record layout. The couple of small items that have changed is the very first position is a 6 instead of a 5. So the 6 indicates that this is a record for the 25-26 cycle. In addition, the person UID, which is a unique identifier that's created for the person, we had originally thought that that would be the same value across the cycles. We have since determined that it will be a new value created for each cycle. So the person UID that was created for the 24-25 cycle will not be the same UID that's used in the 25-26 cycle. For the FPS correction reason, which is the reason why FPS system generates a correction, there will be a new value added of A that will be used later in this year. And this will be for around when we're trying to recalculate an SAI based on information that we've gotten back from the IRS or data that we've gotten that we want to go back and create a new FAFSA transaction. In addition, for the SSN, if we create what we're calling our pseudo SSN, and as a reminder, pseudo SSNs are only created for students, and they are students living in one of the freely associated states that don't have a Social Security number. When those are created, they start with 000. If a pseudo SSN is created for the 25-26 cycle, the next two digits will be 26. The last four are just sequentially assigned. If the pseudo SSN was created for the 24-25 record, the middle digits would be 25. If a student created a FAFSA in 24-25 that has a pseudo SSN and they are applying for 25-26, we will pull forward or use that same pseudo SSN. We won't create a new pseudo SSN for the 25-26 cycle. The DHS secondary match, that is no longer being used. So that position on the ICER has been converted to filler. So there will be no information included in that field. And then we also have updated the dates for the new award year. So the date ranges will fall within the processing cycle for 25-26. And as we talked about a little bit before around the SAI calculation, in the FTIM block of the ICER, the tax year that will be located there will be the 2023 tax year to correspond to the 25-26 FAFSA. Also with the ICER, last year for 24-25, as long as having the version in the FAFSA specification guide, we provided an Excel version of the ICER record layout. We will continue to do that going forward. So the Excel version has been populated and posted for the 25-26 cycle. The only changes we made is there is now a column in the Excel file, also in the version in the FAFSA specification guide, that indicates any changes. So that column will indicate if there is any changes to the value or if the field label has been updated, like maybe the award year in the actual field label has been updated. So that column will clearly define which of any of the fields on the record layout have had field name changes or value changes. As a reminder, this is also in volume 4A of the FAFSA specification guide in 25-26. So moving from the ICER updates, I want to talk about the FAFSA Partner Portal. So as a reminder, the FAFSA Partner Portal is a replacement for the old FA Access website. So this is the web product that schools like financial aid administrators or state agencies can use to view processed information. Since the 23-24 FAFSA cycle is now closed out, the FAA Access website has been retired and is no longer available. For FAFSA Partner Portal, there is actually two different URLs that need to be used. There is one specific to the 24-25 cycle and one that is specific to the 25-26 cycle. So that is a difference from before, where you would log into the one website and within the website choose which cycle you want to use. Just as a reminder, when you access the website, or if you have both websites up because you're working in both cycles, if you log out of one website, it will automatically log you out of the other website. You would just need to log back in, but that's just a reminder because it can catch you unaware, thinking that you're just logging out of the one cycle. So based on the homepage here, you can see there's really not been a whole lot of changes to the FAFSA Partner Portal. For the homepage, the main difference is going to be knowing exactly which award year you're going into. And what we've done on both homepages, there is a link in the upper left-hand corner that will allow you to basically open up a new tab for the other award cycle. So if you get to one of the FAFSA Partner Portal URLs, you can easily just click the link to get to the other cycle. Logon will be the same for both cycles. None of that information will change. So 25-26 for FAFSA Partner Portal will have the same functionality as it does for 24-25 right now. You have the homepage, like I talked about, where you can link between the cycles. The school or the financial aid administrators can view any of the processed information. No changes to any of the fields. It's all the same fields. They're grouped in the same order. And then the FAAs also have the ability to make corrections to a processed transaction. And then within the corrections functionality, they can also print a signature page if they need to capture an electronic signature, or they can also calculate an estimated SAI. So if you make changes before you submit them, you can actually do a calculate and see what the new SAI would be based on the changes that you're thinking about submitting on the record. As a reminder, the signature page that you're printing is used to just capture the student or any other missing signatures that are on the form. You would capture them, you would keep that signature page, and you can electronically apply the signatures via a correction. The signature page only is for signatures. FAAs do not have the ability to capture consent or provide consent via the correction process. The student or the other contributor has to give us consent themselves. That has to come either from the studentaid.gov, from them providing it via the online process, or they can give us consent via the paper FAFSA application or via the paper FAFSA submission summary process. For 25-26, we will still be implementing, as I mentioned earlier, the ICER request function. So this is where schools or state agencies can either request individual or specific files, or they can do a year-to-date request if they need us to resend all of the ICERs that we have already sent them for the cycle. And as a reminder, when this functionality is implemented, it's going to be implemented for both 24-25 and for 25-26. And as I mentioned, both schools and state agencies will be able to do this request. So here's just an example of a snippet of one of the screenshots. As you can see, the fields are in the same order. The only thing that's really changed is some of the field labels have been updated to account for the new 25-26 cycle. So that's it for changes to FAFSA Partner Portal. The last thing I just want to touch on is some of the reference materials that are out there and available for folks to use. So the first one is the FAFSA Specification Guide. There are currently 9 volumes. Just as a change for 25-26, you'll see that there's now a volume 4A and 4B. That volume was split into two because the size of the volume was getting quite large. So 4A is just the record layouts. It contains the 3 record layouts. The biggest one is the ICER record layout. And then it also has the EDE correction layout for the file of corrections being sent to FPS, and then the error file that would return to the school if any of the corrections that were sent in failed. That's the functionality that will come up later this cycle. Volume 4B now contains all of the processing codes. So now between splitting up in between those 2 volumes, it makes it a little bit more manageable for that information. And like I said, along with the 9 volumes, there is also the Excel record layout for the ICER. Then along with all of the volumes for the FAFSA specification guide, there is a separate student aid index guide and Pell Grant eligibility. This document has all the information on how to calculate the student aid index, how to determine if a student is max Pell eligible, min Pell eligible, and any of the different values that could fall into each one of those categories. As I said before, there has been no changes to the actual calculation themselves. There are still 3 formulas. We still calculate a max Pell, still determine if there's a min Pell. The only thing that has changed are the offset values, and the table values have been updated for the 25-26 cycle. And as a reminder for the poverty guidelines, if you're using that in the calculation, when you go to HHS, you want to use the poverty guidelines for the 2023 calendar year. The 2022 calendar year was used for 24-25. All of these documents have been currently posted to the Knowledge Center, so you can go out, look at any of the volumes of the FAFSA specification guide, get the Excel version of the ICER record layout, and also get the updated SAI guide for 25-26. So with that, Kellis and I would like to say thank you for listening to our presentation. We hope you have found this information useful. And if you think of any questions or you have any comments, our email addresses are located here for you to reach out and contact us. Thank you.